Welcome to Stuck in the Middle, TTT, Tragedy to Triumph Transformation. This is all about taking the information that we have and applying it to you in your life so that you can be buffaloes, not cowards. We want to keep it raw, real, and uncut. This is for men to improve their relationships and increasing their spiritual values. I'm Ryan Smith, and I'm the host, and I'm with Bunker Weimer. We had a lot of discussion on the Q&A, and we didn't get to finish, but we want to answer every question. And so we're going to answer today's Megan and Robert's question. So first, Bunker, do you want to read Megan's question?
Absolutely. Howdy and hello. It's been several years since I escaped my partner and their abuse. I am physically safe now and have been for years, but I'm still scared. I'll accidentally run into my abuser randomly when shopping or whatever. I don't like feeling that burden. Can I let it go? What do you think?
Good. Well, maybe just to start out, thank you, Megan, for sharing and jumping up and expressing. What I really hear you saying is there's no physical threat, but there's still the emotional threat. And so thank you for sharing that vulnerability with the community so that others in a similar situation can learn from you and learn with you, really. And Megan's question isn't that different from anyone else. I think we've all experienced people that have been unkind to us, and we may move away to another state or far away, but that pain, the acid, the memory is still there. And so I just want to start out with a story, Megan, and for everybody else that I think we can relate with. I have a good friend who she um, she had a bad boyfriend. Her ex-boyfriend had many great traits why they were dating, but when they broke up, I think some of his bad traits they really revealed themselves, and he was emotionally abusive to my friend. And this uh, and my friend, it's been several years since this has happened, but anything that even the location that they had been before, she avoided those because it reminded her of the negative experiences. And he was particularly abusive, I think, as they broke up. And he was not willing to let that relationship end. I think she had uh, decided to break things off, and he was not okay with that. And I think that's when he tried to be more manipulative and was unkind. And so I think this is a great question that I think many people deal with. Bunker, so that's the situation. I mean, the listeners, Bunker, can you relate? I know I can relate. Maybe anything that reminds you of that past negative relationship you want to avoid. And anything maybe before we go into the solution.
No, absolutely. When you were speaking, I kind of was reflecting on my own self experiences I've had. And I don't think there would be anything like overly extreme, but I think it's common to have feelings like that, even even if it wasn't necessarily abusive, that sometimes we want to avoid those areas where we might see that person again, depending on how the relationship ended. And so I've definitely had to work on that with myself of kind of putting faith and love over fear of what could be or what could happen going to a certain location or place.
Yeah, I and just to be honest, I know like with my ex-spouse, like just hearing her voice, like it would bring all sorts of adrenaline and just fear and just all sorts of unresolved pain, and that is not a it's not a pleasant place. So it's no wonder you don't want to go back to those places because it the emotional burden of that is so heavy. And so this is real. This is Megan, you're not alone. This is part of the human experience, and so we want to. This is the raw, real, and rewarding part of today's podcast. So, if I could start, Bunker, I think the message that we talked as we were discussing your issue, Megan, I think can be summed up in one phrase: let go and let God. Bunker, do you want to maybe break this down a little bit more?
Absolutely. So the first part of letting go, it's something we've talked about a lot. And letting go can be really hard because we like to hold on to a lot of things. One thought that I had, just briefly, there's a book called The Power of the Now, and the author in that book says that the reason why we have such a hard time letting go is because that we, as time goes on and we move forward in life, we collect problems and we start to build those problems into our identity. So when it comes time to let go of those problems, it's like letting go of an actual part of ourself. And I thought that rang really true, at least for myself, and I think that would ring true for many other people, because oftentimes our problems and the things that we identify with aren't really ourselves. So as we're letting go of the things that aren't part of ourselves that we kind of hold on to, and we're letting God take care of those things. I don't know if there's something that you would like to add to that, Ryan.
Uh, there, I like that because what you're saying is when you let go, there's a part of you that you have to kill. There's
Yeah,
something that you love, and you have to get rid of that. And it's something that you're familiar with. And I think with any, uh, the reason why people maybe stay victims in their life, and the reason why they maybe go into another bad relationship is because they're not letting go, they're keeping their old self, and their pain has become precious to them. They wouldn't say it in those terms, but they're remembering. So anytime you remember, you keep remembering that divorce, you keep remembering that breakup, and that's always on autoplay in your mind. It means you're keeping that, and it's become the pain that you're familiar with. And maybe you keep remembering how you were mistreated as a child, and that becomes your identity, and so you play it out in your adulthood. And the the thing about pain and just how our brains are wired is we remember pain a lot more than we remember pleasure, because our brains are made to keep us alive. They're made to survive. And so if our brain has to choose between pain or pleasure, it's going to remember pain, because then hopefully we learn from that. And I don't have to touch the stove. I don't think I've ever touched a hot stove like on purpose, but I've touched other hot things and I've burned. I remember that pain. I don't want to be burned again. And so it's helpful to keep us alive, and that's why our brains are wired for remembering pain. But so can you make sense why our brain would be having that to keep us alive, right? But psychologically, that's why it's hard to forgive. We have to outwire, I don't know, hijack. We have to go above the wiring of our brain to let forgiveness. That has to be a conscious choice. Forgiveness is not an automatic thing that we do. It's a command that we have to give to our brain, to our subconscious. I am choosing to forgive this pain and let that go. So that's a very conscious decision, because our brain is already just locks on to remembering the pain. So I think that is important to understand the just physiology of our brain and how trauma emotionally remembers these things. And one thing, if we could take this, make it a little bit bigger. We said that the motto of this, the answer to this is let go and let God. I think a slightly larger motto that is still not Ryan and Bunker's, but
uh,
widely used. Um, Bunker, did you want to say it?
sure. Let God prevail.
Well, the
Or
AA theme prayer.
oh, the Serenity Prayer.
Yes.
Gotcha. Yes, it says, God grant me serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah. So God or higher power, grant me the serenity, the peace, the forgiveness, the let goingness, if you will, to accept the things I cannot change. The past, right? You just, and the courage to change the things I can. I can forgive. I can make that conscious decision, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I think that's ultimately just a great motto to live life. And that's hanging proudly in one of my rooms that I see often. But yeah, did you want to say a little bit more about President Nelson, Let God Prevail?
We can add on to it later. I think that's or I guess, or now, either way. But I think that's a great message as well. That's something that's become a good model for myself. And going along with the Serenity Prayer, I believe that there's many things that we hold on to, a lot of things that perhaps we do not forgive. And as we hold on to those things, it doesn't damage anyone but ourselves. I think sometimes a person may offend us and we're really upset at that individual. So I will hold on to that. And in my mind, it's like kind of getting payback on that person. But that person might have no idea that you're even doing that. But it really just hurts you, puts you in a worse frame of mind. It can be damaging to all parts of your being. And so I thought it was really inspired, that message of let God prevail, because the word prevail means to prove greater than opposing forces. So if we are letting God prove that he is more powerful than the opposing forces in our life, that can be a very faith-driven message of hope, that although we don't know the future or the outcome, what will happen, as we let go and we can practice forgiveness, we can be at peace and God will prevail. He will fight our battles for us. So I don't know. I hope that makes sense. But that to me really encapsulates kind of the conversation that we're having in regards to letting go and let God, and including the spirituality of those things with it, and also just our overall well-being. Because the question is kind of like a fear-based question, right? She's saying, I have some fear about this situation. And I think that sometimes the answers that we're giving, or the opinions that we have to share, aren't the most popular one because they require some hard things. But I think those hard things can become very simple and easy over time, because we're constantly in a battle with our ego, if you will. And as we fight that ego and we win one battle, the next battle becomes easier and easier to win, and we build momentum. It's like a snowball effect, but against ourselves.
Yes. Well, I thank you for referring back to Megan's question here. She says, I don't like feeling that burden, feeling scared. Can I let it go? And so, Megan, just outright, if we haven't been clear, I want to be very clear right now. Yes, you can let it go. And so, thank you for trusting your gut. Yes, you can let it go. And it, it's not that time heals all wounds. It's that healing and appropriate healing will heal all wounds. And um, when we think of maladaptive behavior, maladaptive by definition means that what you're doing does not produce the results you want. If you're doing something, you're trying to create $1 million business, but then you start doing something that won't produce that, that's maladaptive. Um, and so holding a grudge can be a form of maladaptive behavior, because what you said, Bunker, is that you're staying in that fear, you're avoiding things, you're not growing or getting better, you're just avoiding and closing yourself off to the world, and therefore you're letting your fears make your decisions and not your faith. And
Right.
so so holding a grudge, the reason why we probably do it is that if we ever get in a conflict again, we want to have all that pent up energy and then be ready to smack them in the jaw when we should have, and we're mad at ourselves that we didn't have that quick witted, interrupting, slap them in the face moment, what we should have, that our anger would have created us to do. And so we try to go back to that past experience and that emotion to help us, give us permission to do that scary thing that we couldn't do when we were more innocent and in maybe a more naive frame of reference. And so we hold on to that grudge so that if we're ever getting to that place again, we're never taken advantage of. But that grudge, the reason why it's maladaptive is it's hurting yourself in the present moment where you're maybe not seeing the conflict, and then you see everybody as your past ex-abuser, and then you're cutting off relationships before they even have a time to grow. And so it hurts you, and it's not trusting yourself, because I think if you truly trust yourself, you're going to know that if you are in that bad abusive situation, you're going to have the surge of passion, energy, anger that you need to defend yourself and put those boundaries up. And maybe you do need to fight, flight, freeze. And so I think it's the people that are unwilling to forgive at the bottom of it is because they do not trust themselves. They do not trust that in those moments of conflict that they'll be able to, turn on their and get their teeth out to fight. And so they're always ready to fight, even when it's not even a fighting situation. And so I think at the bottom of it is just a lack of trust and knowing when and so that's why they're so rigid to to adapt. And I know you have something to say, but let me just finish this thought. For example, have you ever been to like, I don't know, like Bunker, you're in school still, right? So
Yeah.
I remember this happened to me, but like I'd be studying all day and I'd have to be cranking out, remembering all the boring facts, preparing for the test or whatever. And then, but I said, at 7 p.m. is when the dance started. And so then I stopped studying at 6:50 or whatever, and then take a quick shower and then run to the dance. And then there's a different headspace that I get into. And um, and as like a freshman, it took me like a whole hour or two to like transition to like dance mode and like be asking girls to dance with me. But later, I was able to transition very quickly from study mode to having fun and meeting new friends. And so and so I was able to trust myself to go to a different archetype, a different headspace quicker. And I think the reason why forgiveness takes courage is because you're trusting that you can forgive them, let go, let God. And then in the moment that you're going to need your teeth in that warrior archetype, that you can turn it back on. But the person that doesn't always stays in the warrior. But the true person with trust can be in their love archetype, their lover, when they're in relationships. But then in the moment that you know, they need to get their sword out, they can in a moment turn on their warrior archetype.
So would you say that that's kind of, I think there's a lot of talk about like victimization, the victim mentality, but there's a lot of pushback against that. I think the kind of society is saying, hey, no matter what happens to you, be tough, push through it, keep going. Sounds like kind of what you're saying to me is you can be a victim and recognize, hey, like something's happening to me, but you don't have to take on all those negative stereotypes of being somewhat like frozen where you're at and not being able to work through things. Is that kind of what you're saying? Because
Yeah,
it sounds like that. I think
exactly.
that's very important.
And I'm glad you slowed it down because it is important. I think I've talked about this before, but it is important for there to be, like we always say, like the victim mentality is like bad and like don't be a victim. I say it differently. Being a victim isn't a necessary step in the healing process. It's the first step. You're abused, then you're a victim. You see that you are treated less than your divinity. You need to see that. But the problem is that people stay stuck in that. And so opposed to seeing it bad and negative, I see it as a necessary step, but let's transition through it fast. So see
Gotcha.
it happen, recognize, yeah, what they did was not good and it wasn't appropriate. Okay, but then let's move on to the survivor stance. What can we do if that happens again? But then if we stay in that too long, then you become the victimizer. You become so good at protecting yourself that you cut other people's legs off. And that's not a place. And so you want to get to the thriver place where you can just be authentically you and go and be. And we've talked a lot about yin and yang and feminine and masculine energy. And ultimately, all we're really saying is being flexible. And you want to be in flow and you want to be able to use your different archetypes. And I love Tony Robbins taught me this, the four main archetypes: the warrior, the magician, the lover, and the sovereign, the king or the queen. And we have probably more archetypes than that, but he talks primarily about these four, and those are different aspects of ourself. But too often we usually stay in the warrior archetype that is just a hard charging, get it done, which is a great archetype in some situations, but sometimes it's better to be the magician who can just in a moment just kind of flip things on its head, or the lover who it can be free and open and live with love and passion, or the sovereign who who knows that no pain is permanent and that things change. The only thing that is permanent is our soul. And so the king or the sovereign, the queen, will have kind of a wise, divine kind of bird's eye view of the situation, and you want to be able to use the right archetype. And ultimately, I think to be in flow, to be in perfect balance, is to incorporate all archetypes in the moment. And Tony Robbins talks about Conor McGregor, the boxer who's done really well in MMA, mixed martial arts. And when he was trained by Tony, he was able to, opposed to kind of being this angry guy, he was able to be calm and feel like he could do it easily. And Conor McGregor, I think one of his skills is that he was, I think his prior title was like uh, Magician Max or something like that. I don't, I could be, I think I'm wrong, but it's something like the Magician. And because he could anticipate the thing, and because he's kind of a small, tiny guy, and even one arm looks like bigger than the other, but he was able to kind of be in his magician place. And then once he beat his opponent, he was like in this very lover and very gracious winning place rather than being an arrogant buffoon. But he was very gracious and he was able to graciously accept his win. And he even thanked his opponent's grandmother who had raised him as a mother, and thanked him and said, I have a lot of respect for you. And so that was, I think, a great story demonstrating of incorporating, although he's a boxer, you'd think he only used the warrior, but he was able to incorporate different aspects of himself that helped him to be the complete champion. And so that's what I hope that we can do in life, is that sometimes we need to transition to lover, sometimes we need to transition to magician or warrior, or the king or queen, the sovereign.
Awesome. So you're kind of saying that not only that you can identify as a victim, but that you should, but you just don't want to let victimization have a negative effect on you. Don't have that hold. So I just was thinking about Megan's question about how she feels physically safe, but she's still kind of holding on. She's still in that like victim survivor phase. And we're just trying to help her say or understand that she can let go and move on to the next step. And if there's a future situation that presents that has the same emotional response, she can move through these steps even quicker and not have to live in a state of fear. Would you say that's a fair
Yeah.
summary?
Thank you. That was a great summary. Thank you. I think those are very helpful at the end of a long-winded response. And I, and even to summarize it and maybe even focus it even more, what I'm ultimately saying for Megan and for everybody is just the importance of forgiveness. And I think also demonstrating courage um and challenging those fears. And I don't know, what for my friend there, I don't actually know. Uh, but I think there is some growth, and I think there's some confrontation that can happen as well. And for my one friend, I almost wonder if she should go back to these places, or even maybe confront this person, or something. Uh, it's interesting. You want to not maybe not. This is not a blanket statement for everyone, but is there something that if you're wanting to live your life in one way, but you're like, no, I can't do this because of them, then I would challenge you to say, no, do that thing that you're doing. And maybe to be more on the nose with this, I'm doing this stand up comedy improv thing. And my friend would have wanted to come, but she didn't want to come and support me because the chance that her ex boyfriend would be involved with this. And that was very sad for me. Like, I wanted my friend to be there, but I also, she decided not to go because the per chance that he might be there, because he has some strings connected with that organization. So um, I would probably challenge her, like, and if she sees that ex, she's married now, and I don't know what's happened with him, but I'm sure he's moved on and repented of his mistakes, and he's not. So I would I would really challenge Megan and all of us to, what decisions, what's informing our decisions. If it's fear, then how can we replace it with faith?
And going along with that, just one thought I had, I think it's even fair to assume that if you're not feeling inner peace in your life, the question to respond to that might be, what or who do I need to forgive in my life? I think through forgiveness is what cuts the negative ties to things in our life. And as we forgive, and it could even be our own selves, our own experiences long ago, recently. And as we do those things, that will bring inner peace to our lives. And not to kind of have a question that I wanted to pose to you and hear your thoughts. I have a lot of my own thoughts as well, but what role do you believe that spiritual identity has to do with how we respond to such conflicts?
Spiritual identity. So identity is how you see yourself. So
Right.
how does your spiritual identity affect you? And I think you probably have some more thoughts on this, but I just want to maybe summarize with what we're saying. And this is kind of the spiritual part of the post-secularism of this podcast, is what Paul said in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. So if you're making a decision out of fear, that's the wrong spirit. That's let's be honest. That's the devil. That is not how you want to be living your life. But if you're making decisions out of power, love, and a sound mind, then yeah, you know that that's the right decision for you. So
Oh,
see,
absolutely.
so spiritual identity is you see yourself as a child of God. A child of God will make decisions out of power, love, and a sound mind. Therefore, if she wants to go to a comedy thing because which will be fun for her and her family, and maybe she confronts her ex and lets that not no longer do that. And I think there's just so much to expose there. I mean, there's a whole therapy around this, and it's called exposure therapy. There's people that they're afraid of snakes or spiders or something, and what they do is I've seen this. Tony Robbins did it, the NLP. He got the snake, and by the end she had the big snake on her, the python wrapping around her, and she's smiling and feeling comfortable. And I've even seen people with, was it arachnophobia, afraid of spiders, and by the end they're able to hold a tarantula in their hand, no problem, and they're exposing themselves to the stimulus that was in the past very triggering and caused fight, flight, or freeze responses in their system. And because they were able to kind of have slow exposure and some other tools, they no longer did that. And I feel like, what is The Sandlot? Have you seen that, like, old movie? Like, what?
Baseball movie?
Yeah, the baseball movie.
Yeah.
Like, and there's so many movies like that, but that's the first one that comes to my mind. The kids are deathly afraid of the beast that lives in the backyard, and then the leader of the pack, he took the exposure therapy course, goes into the backyard, grabs it, and the big, I don't know if it's a bloodhound, but the big Beethoven dog comes, and I can't remember what happened exactly at the very end, but ultimately the dog was no longer part of the story, and this guy, I don't think it's a true movie, but at least according to the movie, goes on to be a professional baseball player. And from that permission he gave himself to face his fears and go into the backyard of a neighbor's, and that dog was the permission to do other heroic things and become a professional baseball player. And I think that, although maybe not a true life story, that those are true principles, is that when you face small fears, you're able to handle bigger fears in your life.
Absolutely. It was cool that you shared that scripture, 2 Timothy, about that, because I remember probably about 5 years ago, my mother shared that scripture with me. I was having a conversation with her, and just to kind of encapsulate all the things we were just talking about, she was talking to me about worries and anxieties. I've been thinking about a lot of different things, and she kind of was just like, "Hey, like, I think you're worrying about a lot of things you don't have control over, and you're letting worries and anxieties kind of dominate your psyche." And I was able to kind of do some research on my own, find some books that I read, but I was able to kind of categorize it. There's love and there's fear, and specifically, like, any worry or anxiety falls under like a fear category. You could probably even replace the word worry and anxiety with fear. And I realized that if I was coming from a place of worry or anxiety, that there was a way that I treated certain people around me. Like I didn't treat them probably the best way because I wasn't coming from a place of love. It was more like hurt, fear, scared, negative emotions. And so as you were sharing your story about your friend who did not want to come to the comedy club, and you had shared a little bit more background previously, how she had a boyfriend and he wasn't the best. She had some feelings that she was kind of harboring against him. And then she moved on, ended up getting married. But is that story kind of correct?
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you. Yeah, we spoke offline before this bunker session.
Yeah. So kind of the question I guess I have, because I'm just relating it off of myself, was have you noticed or do you feel like there's been negative consequences in her relationships because of not resolving certain fears or worries that she had in the past, whether it was with this guy or with just other circumstances?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for sharing that. So thank you for setting me up for this bunker. This so grateful for you. Yeah, like let's get real. So the what had happened with my friend, she moved on, she got married, and she found someone, and she was very diligent in finding someone that was not abusive, which was a good thing. And she found her husband very kind, very loving, which was very important for her, which maybe wasn't as important prior to that relationship. Um, but the thing is because of her fear with getting taken advantage of by men or by her past ex, she kind of incorporated that to all men and in all of her intimate relationships, and therefore there was a big shift for her. And I remember seeing, I knew her for many years, so I saw her before that boyfriend, and with when she was with other boyfriends, she was very passive and open, and she let her man be the leader and preside, and she was, I think, softer in sharing her opinions, and she was kind of like quick to like laugh at his jokes and stuff like that. She was more in her feminine energy. But from that, she recognized she needed more of her warrior archetype, which is more of a masculine energy. And so she kind of transitioned, and especially in her intimate relationship, what I've seen, because I've been to her house with her kids, is she has been more warrior archetype, more strong, and therefore she is controlling, and she isn't as kind to her husband. And and it she has more of a masculine energy, and therefore he has become more feminine in his energy, and the balance is off. And I think they're both working too hard. He I can tell his voice isn't heard, and there's a lot of he's a very smart guy, but he thinks it's the most loving thing to just kind of just let her go because she's so dominant. And but and let me be more specific. I think in disciplining their kids, she never lets her husband, lay the smackdown on their kids because she's so afraid of seeing that masculine energy in a man. And so her kids are pretty. They don't have a lot of constraint on their kids, and they're very they do a lot of begging and pleading with their kids. If you do this, we'll take this away, and then they don't follow through. But usually fathers are pretty good. Like, hey, if you don't do this, all right, down. They're pretty quick to what they say, but um, that doesn't happen in their home because there's too much, I think, feminine energy. I think with the parenting, and I think that's affected their children, and they're great kids, and I love them. However, the they get away with a lot. I'll say it like that. So, and I think that has an play. And I think as a husband, he he doesn't have the leadership that he needs, and I think he works hard, and he's not able to get his needs met in the relationship. She does, but he doesn't. And my prediction is he'll have an early death because he suppresses so much. And I think that she'll regret that stifling and not being able to let things grow naturally in their relationship.
Thanks for sharing that story. I think that's a really hard spot for like both people to be in. And I think there's some like unawareness that's going on of how much like damage can be happening. I think in the dating aspect, I see that all the time where and you touched on this briefly, where a girl will have an experience dating, and then she kind of puts a blanket term on all men, like all men are bad, they all suck, they're all horrible. And I definitely see where they're coming from, but they tend to fall more into that masculine energy to protect themselves. It's it's often interesting to me as well because a lot of times they become the very thing that they kind of swore to destroy or that they hate so much. And it's a hard thing to watch, especially the people that you love. I One of the notes we kind of wrote down and talked about yesterday was a book called Love and Respect. I had a friend recommend it to me. Kind of he was going through his own dating problems, and also he was observing the relationship of his parents, and he was sharing with me, and he said, hey, I found this book, and it's been interesting because he said, yeah, I've recommended it to a lot of girls that I know, and none of them want to read it because the reviews online say it's so like sexist and misogynistic. And I've actually found the same uh, scenario. But as I read it, I didn't feel like anything it said was negative at all towards women, but it had this concept that just as women desire unconditional love, men desire unconditional respect. Like love is for women and respect is for men. Now that's not inclusive that like women don't want to receive respect, but nor do I think that the way that respect is defined by like, us as a society is always correct. But I definitely believe that as men will show that love to women, and that women can show respect to men, things seem to kind of follow out or fall into place. And it sounded like kind of going off your story that you were telling when you think about it was how it sounds like she doesn't have a lot of respect for her husband. She's kind of like keeping him a little bit suppressed. And that's just a tough spot. I kind of empathize with them. Like some of the guys I know who are such phenomenal guys and they're so kind, but they hold all that stuff in and they want to just love their wife or their girlfriend unconditionally. And it's kind of like if you give her an inch, she takes a mile. But I don't want to necessarily label her in this story as bad or evil because I'd imagine she's kind of unaware. So I guess that was kind of like a little follow-up question I had is do you feel like she's aware of these things at all? Or do you feel like this is like a very subconscious thing for
Yeah,
her?
subconscious, unaware of how she's just staying in that second phase of she was the victim. She got really good at understanding the victim, and then she became the survivor. She's
Right.
stuck in the survivor, and she's been there so long, which is a good place to be in. She's a really tough woman, and she's really good, like in the workforce. Nobody, she's so good at her boundaries. She's better than me. Like she's really good at her boundaries, which is a good thing. But a little bit, but she doesn't know when to let go and to kind of just coast a little bit, use the magician energy a little bit more, or the lover energy. So, uh, yeah, and I just think so. Ultimately, for Megan and for all of you, just building that self awareness is so key. And let's just say it like it is. If you've been abused, there's trauma there, and so you have post traumatic stress. And then this is the decide: is it a disorder or is it post traumatic stress growth? And you can make the decision. And if you're aware of it, that's the first step in making it not a disorder, but making it growth. So the difference between post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or post traumatic growth.
PTSG.
PTSG. It even sounds good, right? And and so I think Megan, that there's if you stay stuck in that place, it's going to be PTSD for you. But if you allow yourself to make decisions out of faith, then that can be a growth. And sometimes I would even challenge my clients. Maybe it was like, oh, it's okay if I don't go to the comedy show, but because I'm not going because I'm afraid I might meet him, then I have to go because I want to do it for myself and the integrity and my fears. Like I need to do that because I know that my decision before was naturally to make a decision out of fear. So then I have to do it, even though it's like, it's okay if I don't go, but I have to do it because I want to combat that and I want to grow from that. And so uh, I just think, and if you don't do that, then you become the abused becomes the abuser, like what you said. And then there's a cyclical Batman Joker relationship where you create the relationships you're in and you create maybe opposingly, but basically what I'm saying is my friend has become her ex-boyfriend and
Mm.
her husband has become who she once was, the innocent. And it, and if she was aware, I don't think she would be doing that. So it's just the lack of awareness that happens. So I hope that answers your questions. I think just to, unless I'm just going to summarize this, but Bunker, and anything else before we move on to the last question?
No, I think I'm good. I'm ready for your summary.
Yeah. So in summary, let go and let God, or in other words, the serenity prayer. God or higher power, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that burden that you hold is psychological, and it needs to be replaced not with fear, but with forgiveness and faith, which will surge you with power, love, and a sound mind. And for the story we're going with my friend, if she were to go to my comedy club, knowing that she might meet her ex, there'd be a psychological wrestle that would be going on in her, and she would be prepared. Okay, if I meet my ex, this is what I would say, and that process would give her like power, and she'd be kind of on her edge of her seat, and it would get her alive. And that feeling of being like a little bit afraid but kind of confronting it, that is what it feels like to be alive, and that's a gift. So being afraid and confronting fear is great. The only problem is like how you use it. So use that fear and make decisions out of faith, which are power, sound mind, and and love. So that is it. And I love what you said about love and respect. And and we'll talk a little bit more about this masculine and feminine energy in a future episode. And but I liked, women, they want to be loved unconditionally. Men want to be respected unconditionally. And if you're the other gender, feel like, hey, my and that book, Love and Respect, is by Dr. Emerson Egerich. And if you want something, then you got to be willing to give it. And so if you're a man, you're saying, my woman doesn't respect me. Well, then how good are you at loving her? And so we'll talk a little bit more about those different things. I think in closing, this different state of mind are from a Japanese parable. And there was a warrior who went to go see the sage on the far corners of the jungle. And when he went to go see her, um, she challenged him, and she had said, how come you've killed so many innocent, you've even killed children and and even women and children? And he was feeling like defensive, and he pulls out his sword and he puts the blade right to her neck, and she says, and you would even kill me, a defenseless woman? And he says, that is, and or his question is there a heaven, is there a hell, and am I going to hell because of all the things I've done? And and she answers it in a question and says, well, what have you done? And then it caused all this defensiveness, and he gets out his sword, and then she says, where you are right now, that is hell. And then he puts down his sword, and um and then and then she asks, you know what are we going to do about this? And then he's like in this complex, like, maybe I need to like repent, and maybe and give homage to these families that I've tortured in war. And there's like a softening of his demeanor, his psychology, and she said that is heaven. And so your state of mind matters, and how you think about the problem, that is the difference between PTSD and PTSG. So